Colleagues, we'll call this meeting to order. Thank you for your patience. We had a few technical elements that we had to sort out. I want to welcome everyone to the meeting of the Special Joint Committee on Medical Assistance in Dying, and welcome especially our witnesses this morning. I know that we have one witness from the West Coast, so it's very early there. And welcome to everyone who is watching on the web. My name is Yana Martin, the Senate's Joint Chair on this committee, and I'm joined by video conference the Honorable Marc Garneau, the Joint Chair of the House of Commons. Today we're continuing to examine the statutory review of the provisions of the Criminal Code relating to medical assistance in dying and their application. And in fact, this is our last meeting with witnesses, as colleagues know, and next Tuesday we will be discussing instructions for the drafting of the report. So thank you to all of my colleagues who have worked very hard throughout the past few months. I'd like to remind members and witnesses to keep their microphones muted unless recognized by name by one of the joint chairs, and a reminder that all comments should be addressed through the joint chair. When speaking, please speak slowly and clearly, and interpretation in this video conference will work like an in-person committee meeting. You have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either Floor, English, or French. So we're going to begin our testimonies shortly for panel one, who the witnesses are here to discuss protections for persons with disabilities. So we have as individuals Dr. Catherine Frazee, Professor Emerita of the School of Disability Studies at the Toronto Metropolitan University by video conference. We also have Isabelle Grant, Professor of Allard School of Law at the University of British Columbia. And lastly, Ms. Megan Linton, a PhD candidate who is here with us in the committee room. So each of our witnesses will have 5 minutes to give their remarks. Now, our first witness, we're going to begin with Dr. Frazee, has a pre-recorded testimony, and due to the nature of the testimony, it will be slightly longer, so I just wanted to let my colleagues know. So we will begin with Dr. Frazee, followed by Ms. Grant and Professor Grant, and then Ms. Linton. So Dr. Frazee, we will hear from you at this time.
Thank you for the opportunity to testify. I speak from Mi'kma'ki, the unceded lands of the Mi'kmaq people, whose dignity in the face of betrayal offers a lesson I hold close to my heart. My focus in these precious minutes, for which I have your attention, is track 2 made. I understand that the suspension...
Please pause. Yes.
Made is not something that you will consider. But underlying my comments today are 4 strongly held views. First, Truchon was wrongly decided and should have been appealed. If nothing changes as a result of this committee's process, that law will have to be challenged in court. Second, Track 2 Made is not end-of-life care, and any rebuttal that its opponents are seeking to interfere with end-of-life choices is specious and beside the point. Third, there are 3 possible ways to interpret why our government did not appeal Truchon. Because of political calculations that had nothing to do with the issue before the court, or because a grievous and irremediable disability is somehow akin to end of life, insofar as it is believed to be the end of meaningful life or life of value, or because beyond the end of life context, there are sound policy reasons to terminate the lives of certain persons who desire death. These reasons, it appears, would extend exclusively to disabled persons who suffer intolerably and request MAID. Presumably, the government would oppose a special pathway to MAID for other suffering persons who are not disabled, such as women trapped in conditions of violent domestic abuse, or parents bearing the irremediable grief of the sudden death of an only child. Of these three explanations, the first would be unconscionable, the second unacceptable, and the third both disingenuous and discriminatory. I therefore take as my starting point that Track 2 is not an expression of equality. It is an exemption to equality. But Track 2 is embedded in law, so here we are. The genie is out of the bottle, and we are left counting our dead. That the government that brought us Track 2 is now seeking ways and means to ensure the protection of people with disabilities is a hard pill to swallow. While practitioners lawfully administer the 3-minute procedure that turns life into death, we now spend every waking hour, every moment and resource not already spent on our own survival, throwing out lifelines to pull our disabled kinfolk back from the vortex that funnels them into the beckoning arms of Track 2 MAID. We pour cash into GoFundMes for food, shelter, medicine, and therapy. We pour our hearts into rescue efforts for friends and strangers, bearing witness to the injustice that afflicts them. And we rigorously record every tragic case where our efforts failed or came too late. I believe you call these anecdotes. We are not trained or resourced for any of this, but our people are dying, and we must step up to save them. You have heard a consistent message from disability rights defenders. To stop the carnage of Track 2, you must do everything within your power to reinstate the equality-affirming requirement for reasonably foreseeable natural death, and delay indefinitely any further expansion of Track 2 MAID. While you are at it, shore up the requirements for Track 1 MAID, at the very least, by explicit affirmation of existing guardrails in the law that have been quietly set aside in actual MAID practice and discourse. These measures will save lives, but they will not restore equality or undo the incalculable damage from a catastrophic social experiment. That is because much of the harm that was unleashed as you celebrated the passage of Bill C-7 was somehow beyond your imagining. The underlying message of Track 2 was clear, and it entered our cultural bloodstream with the speed of an infectious pathogen. The toxic notion that life with disability is optional, and by extension, dispensable, is now in the ether. We are detecting its presence in everyday discourse, in unsolicited coaching from social service gatekeepers, crisis line workers, and ordinary citizens having their say in letters to the editor of the local paper. MAID has swiftly been normalized as a way to relieve the cost and toil of those who are burdened with our care. Its euphemistic framings have not fooled anyone, and every day plain-spoken Canadians are giving voice to the law's subtext. We have important examples to share. Track 2 MAID assaults disabled people everywhere. It harms us through its discriminatory formulation and effects that undermine rather than expand our equality. So much to say, so little time, so much to grieve, so little hope.
Thank you, Dr. Frazee. And next, I'll invite Professor Isabel Grant for your remarks. You will have 5 minutes. Professor Grant.
Thank you very much. While I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak to you today, I do so with a profound sense of despair over what is happening with Track 2 MAID. No matter how many people tell you that C7 is dangerous, and no matter how many people die because they can't afford to live, it feels like a runaway train careening towards a human rights disaster. Ableism is so deeply embedded in our political and social structures that we don't see it as ableism, but rather as a form of common sense. The Supreme Court of Canada describes discrimination against people with disabilities as being premised on a distorted view that disability is a flaw that needs to be fixed or eradicated. It is precisely this ableist view of disability that fueled C7 and is now killing disabled Canadians. This ableism, sadly, has also permeated these hearings. Imagine that you are disabled. Perhaps you live in a one-room apartment. Perhaps you need diapers to deal with your incontinence. You've been listening to these hearings and to your legislators talk about whether it would be better to be dead than to be like you. Far from feeling that your autonomy has been enhanced, you feel demoralized and depressed. You tell your doctor you are struggling, but she just reminds you that you are now eligible for MAID. Is it any wonder that so many disabled Canadians feel devalued and afraid? If you take only one thing from my words today, it is this. There is only one safeguard that will protect people with disabilities from wrongful deaths, and that is reasonable foreseeability of natural death. That is the only safeguard that can prevent people dying because they are too poor, too isolated, or too exhausted from fighting for their survival to continue living. Death is the great equalizer. Everyone dies. And this is the only safeguard that removes making value judgments about the worth of disabled lives out of the equation. It is impossible to separate the suffering caused by disability from the suffering caused by the social, economic, and political accompaniments of disability. If I cannot access smoke-free housing, is that my multiple chemical sensitivities, or is that the inadequacy of social housing? If I can't afford an apartment with an elevator, is that my disability or my poverty? If I am facing institutionalization at 40 because the government won't provide me home care to ensure I can get to the bathroom at night, is that my disability, or is that the abject failure of the state to provide the basic necessities of life? These situations have led to the deaths by MAID of real people who did not want to die. This is a system that would not provide Sathya Kovac with home care, but gave her death by a house call. She wrote her own obituary before her death saying, "It was not a genetic disease that took me out, it was a system." The Supreme Court of Canada has held in the death penalty context that one wrongful death is too many. I ask you, how many wrongful deaths are too many for Track 2 MAID? To those who say that MAID is just another form of healthcare, remember it is legislated as an exemption to murder and aiding suicide, and that is the only reason Parliament has any jurisdiction. The Criminal Code makes explicit that ending a life is so serious that we don't allow people to consent to their own deaths. The MAID regime makes an exception to that, but only for disabled Canadians. Only their lives are not worth saving. How can you not see that that is discriminatory? It is irresponsible to delegate the definition of murder and aiding suicide to doctors and ask us to trust a healthcare system that is strapped for resources and near the breaking point. When we look at Canada's record of eugenics, from residential schools, the warehousing of the mentally ill, and the sterilization of Indigenous and disabled women and girls, doctors were deeply implicated in all of these. This government has focused not on eradicating the suffering of people with disabilities, but rather on eradicating the sufferers. I urge this committee to take meaningful steps to prevent the impending human rights catastrophe that will be made for mental illness and to put an end to Track 2 MAID. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Grant. And lastly, we'll turn to the room and Ms. Megan Linton, PhD candidate, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Is the mic working okay? Great. Thank you for having me here on the unceded territories of the Algonquin people. I research institutions for disabled people, an ongoing phenomenon stretching back more than a century and a half in Canada. As a result, I have sifted through hours of class action settlements, years of inquests, archives, interviews with survivors, all replete with the stories of death, of friends, of roommates, of fellow inmates and disabled people who died by suicide, who hung themselves from the rafters, or died by suicide years after escaping the institution, but still haunted by their experiences inside it. For many years, these suicides were a catalyst for great social change, resulting in government commissions and inquiries into these deaths. Last week, Minister David Lametti expressed the intention of Track 2 MAID as necessary because disabled people are unable to complete suicides. As a researcher of institutions, the fallacy of this argument is troubling. For the last century and a half, disabled people have been trapped in institutions, away from their community, reduced to a point of efficiency, a mere practicality. Here in these institutions, which were used as tools for eugenics, removed disabled people from society and prevented their reproduction. Today, the same logic is maintained in institutions where access to pleasure, leisure, or pain management are seemingly non-existent. Instead, these institutions, like prisons, long-term care homes, and psych institutions, maintain conditions of neglect, isolation, and such disregard for individual autonomy that it produces depression and suicidality in people both inside the institution and those who fear it in their future. And people are very clear in their discussions with me. They would rather die than live in an institution. Historically, deaths have been one of the few windows into institutions. Sometimes murky windows, as in the case of the Huronia Regional Center, where the deaths were hidden away in mass cemeteries without markers or names. But the view into institutions, no matter how murky, is a view into austerity, privatization yielding bed sores, neglect, and forced feeding. We've had a view inside the institutions where people use MAID, like Chris Gladders in his retirement home before you pass Track 2 changes. There, where feces stained the floor, instead of cleaning it up, you made changes to expand Track 2. And now the deaths have become so frequent that we are haunted by the possibility of loss at all times. Disabled people are dying en masse in institutions they had been fighting to leave because of Track 2 MAID. These were beautiful lives, and lives that as a disabled person, we look into the windows of these institutions and we fight as hard as we can for a way out, for all of us, not just for an individual through an individual death. You ask us for the protections of disabled people. It is clear, Track 2 MAID must be ended. But you look inside these windows, smashed open by dead bodies, and you see people suffering from the conditions that you yourself created. And instead of offering a solution, a help out the door through provisions of accessible housing, home care, and pain management, you offer people death. Do not be mistaken. This provision of death for disabled people under Track 2 MAID is eugenics, and it must be repealed as soon as possible. We must look at the political economy for the timing of these decisions. Why now, with the increase of pandemics and incurable illnesses like COVID and long COVID? Why now, with pandemic healthcare rationing and with healthcare under the Budget Acts? The expansion of MAID must be viewed within the context of the economic order with which we live under that is eviscerating the social contract by encouraging government to retreat from its responsibilities to the public's welfare and instead kill us. You feel generous to provide mercy from the austerity that you've designed. To all of you, disabled people do not need your help to die. You have been killing us for years. We need your help to get out of the institution you trapped us in. The only safeguard for MAID is foreseeable death.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all of our witnesses for your testimony this morning. So we'll go into our first round of questions. We begin with Mr. Cooper, who will share the 5 minutes with Ms. Vian, so 3 minutes followed by 2 minutes. So Mr. Cooper, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. Thank you to the witnesses for your compelling testimony. Dr. Frazee, I'm going to ask you 2 questions, and if you could just answer them both, because I only have 3 minutes. First of all, you spoke about the shoring up of existing requirements under Track 1. Could you elaborate upon what you mean by shoring up, what recommendations you would have? And speaking of shoring up with respect to Track 1, do you have any recommendations on additional safeguards for Track 2, recognizing, of course, that the requirement of death being reasonably foreseeable should never have been removed? And finally, you spoke of the discriminatory effects that MAID is having on the kinds of things that ordinary citizens say about it. Can you provide the committee with examples of that?
Thank you, through the chair. I'll tackle the first question first, and quite briefly, I can say more in writing if you wish. But there are some very significant phrases in our existing MAID law that are being overlooked, and perhaps I can give 2 examples. One is the meaning of the word natural in the phrase reasonably foreseeable natural death. Reasonably foreseeable natural death is not the same thing as reasonably foreseeable death. A plain reading of the phrase signaled to me that behaviors such as voluntary starvation and other self-destructive acts do not fall within the category of reasonably foreseeable natural death. And that is a distinction that is unfortunately moving people into the Track 1 situation incorrectly, and I would suggest unlawfully. The other very important phrase, and this would affect both Track 1 and Track 2, is the phrase is caused by in section 241 to sub C. The intolerable suffering that is at the heart of MAID eligibility has to be tied directly to a medical condition. It excludes suffering, such as Professor Grant has described, and Professor or Ms. Linton, that is predominantly socioeconomic in nature. That is the major factor in many, many cases. And I believe that that is contrary to section 241 sub 2 2C. I think clarifying these intended meanings in the way the law is drafted would go a long way toward preventing unlawful death.
Dr.
And
Frazee,
enforcing. Yes.
I will interrupt here and say if there's further that further details you wish to send, that you could do that in writing. We've come to the end of this time, so I'll turn this now over to Madame Vien.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la...
Thank you very much, Madam Chairperson. Ms. Fraser, I don't have much time, so a concise answer would be appreciated. You said in your opening remarks that we have to stop the carnage of Track 2. On what basis do you affirm that Track 2 is carnage?
On the basis of the number of cases of concern that we have been documenting and referring to in our testimony over the past 3 days, three meetings, people who clearly wanted to live, being induced to MAID as a form of escape from deplorable conditions of life.
Yes, 1 minute.
Okay, and so could you elaborate on shoring up Track 1?
I'm sorry, is this directed to me?
Yes, sorry, Dr. Frazee. Yes, if you could elaborate on shoring up Track 1.
Well, I think, I mean, I've given you the sort of primary two examples. Clarify the issue of causation. What must be the cause of suffering? A person's medical condition is the only cause of suffering for which MAID was designed and intended. It's the only exemption to the criminal code, and that really needs to be clarified, as does the definition of reasonably foreseeable natural death.
Okay, thank you very much. And next, we'll turn to Madame Brière for 5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Madam Co-Chair. My questions will be directed at the three witnesses on the panel this morning. Over the decades, one of the fundamental principles of the modern movement for disabled persons is to ensure equal access to programs and services that every person in society should be entitled to. Now, given that the decision-making process of an individual who might be considering MAID is unique and individual to their own situation, regardless of the circumstances regarding their status and their own understanding as an individual identifying themselves as disabled or not, and presupposing that all the guarantees and safeguards and protocols are in place and working properly, how would you respond to an individual who is disabled, who might take a well-informed decision to access MAID in collaboration with medical care teams?
To each
Can I comment on that?
Yes, Professor Grant, go ahead.
I think that, we're saying that MAID is available to everyone, and how can we deny that to people with disabilities? And I think the disability community feels that Track 2 MAID is only available to them. And that we would like the government to be focusing on finding ways to make people's lives manageable and to alleviate suffering rather than to alleviate the people who are doing the suffering, because we think that this has been targeting people with disabilities. And as Ms. Litton said earlier, they don't need help dying, they need help living.
Do you want
Mrs. Linton?
Respond to an individual who might make a well-informed decision to access MAID. So I'm 27, I'm disabled, and most of my classmates don't have disabilities and they don't have access to MAID because they don't have disabilities. So I have access to it and they don't. So what is the equal access there? That doesn't really make sense to me. But the problem here is not the individual. It's not about one person making a decision. It's about the collective impacts. And so if one person is making a decision about MAID, as was the case with Jean Touchon, it's an individual choice and an individual response to a situation of social harms. And so, yeah, for them, it might be the worst possible situation. I have been supporting people who have experienced suicidal ideation since I was 16 and can assure you that people can make that decision and do make that decision. I have so many disabled friends who have died by suicide, and I don't think that I look at them badly for dying, but I'm here to say that we don't need help with that. We have access to that. We're dying en masse, and we don't need that support. And that's not what equal access to programs looks like. Equal access to programs would look like access to supports to live in community, not access to supports to die. And so I was a little bit confused by that question because you say in your introduction the tension that there isn't equal access to programs. We only have special access to this one program, and the rest of the systems in society we don't have equal access to. We still have a segregated education system. People aren't able to graduate high school with a diploma. How is that equal access? And do you care about that equal access? And so I'm not, yeah, that's.
There's 1 minute. Go ahead.
Okay, I would just quickly endorse what my fellow panelists have said with respect, again, through the chair. The premise of the question is flawed, as it is. This is not a matter that challenges the notion that disabled people should have equal access and opportunity. Absolutely, we agree with you 100% on that, but track one is not available to non-disabled persons, which begs the question, why is it made specially available to us, given its very substantial implications and harmful consequences?
Thank you, Dr. Frazee. And next we'll go to Monsieur Theriault. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Co-Chair. Well, if I've understood correctly from the three witnesses, well, I'm shocked, quite frankly, by the testimony I've heard. And I think that all members of this committee, since we started our hearings on protecting people with disabilities, that there's a consensus around this, and that is that more must be done for persons with disabilities. I've often been in favour of the idea that a deficiency is individual, but a disability is societal. And on the basis of that premise, it is absolutely clear that more must be done, and yet disabled persons are discriminated against. They are stigmatised against. They do not have equal access to all the forms of care, all the programs. And this is difficult. We agree. They are victims twice, in a sense. Now, if I take your presentations to their natural conclusion, you want to avoid them being victims a second time. Now, at the most intimate point of their lives, a point where they are envisaging, after having experienced their lives, right through to the threshold of what is tolerable, the state should say to them, no, you are not entitled to medical assistance in dying. So they would have the free choice taken away from them. the ability to decide themselves what is acceptable for their own lives. And no person should decide what the quality of life of an individual is apart from that individual themselves. So if the state does that, they are discriminating against disabled persons. The disabled persons are doubly victimized. Now, if you follow that logic and rationale, and if we were just looking at phase one, that is reasonably foreseeable natural death. Now, given the logic that you've described this morning, should we prohibit the refusal of treatment? That is considered a good ethical medical practice because in all likelihood they will be forced to take certain actions. For example, the refusal to eat, dehydration, and they would end up in a situation where their death would be imminent. And a few hours before their death, MAID would be available to them. Because in the context of that kind of distress, well, when you see that the solution for those people who are discriminated against, who don't have equal access to life in society, if we take away the right to MAID for them after assessment, what you're telling those people is that the only option left available to them is suicide if their suffering is irreversible and intolerable. So, is it up to the state to decide in the place of the individual what this threshold of suffering and tolerability is? Who'd like to tackle that, please? Ms. Grant, perhaps?
Sure,
Professor
I'll
Grant.
just make a couple of comments if I could. None of us have spoken to you today about getting rid of track one. Dr. Frizzi mentioned the importance of the word natural, that stopping eating is not a natural death. But I think that the flaw here is that track one is available to everybody at the end of their lives. Limiting MAID to track one does not discriminate against people with disabilities. They too, at the end of their lives, will have access to track one. What discriminates against people with disabilities is saying the law of murder, the law against aiding suicide doesn't apply to you because your deaths are a benefit to you. When you die, that's a good thing. And we're saying you cannot say that to people with disabilities, that their deaths are a social good that their government should promote when they are not reasonably foreseeable. So I think we agree that people with disabilities should have access to track one MAID, as other Canadians do, or I believe that, but not when they are not at the end of their lives. It's not the state's job to kill people with disabilities because they're suffering. It's the state's job to try, as to its best extent possible, to alleviate that suffering in some way or to mitigate it.
Okay, thank you. It's near the end. And lastly, we have Mr. McGregor. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Co-Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses for joining us today. I too am joining you from British Columbia, so I appreciate how early it is. This has absolutely been a very difficult subject for this committee to grapple with, and we certainly have heard some pretty heart-wrenching testimony. We know that far too many persons with disabilities in Canada are living below the poverty line. I have a constituent of mine who's a very real activist in this field, and he's coined the term legislated poverty, and has repeatedly urged the federal government to do more, especially with economic supports because of that disability level. So we know that exists, but Ms. Linton, I'd like to start with you because of the research field you've been involved in. And just for clarification, do you have some statistics to share with the committee just on how many disabled people are living in institutions? What percentage of that is of the larger disability community?
Thank you for that question. One of the challenges is that the government has not conducted a census on the institutional population since 1991 when it did the House Institutional Survey. At that point, it was really beneficial to do that survey following a committee hearing much like this, which revealed the significant impacts of institutions and particularly disability obstacles in Canada. And so after that time, we haven't had really up-to-date information on the size of the institutionalized population. Right now, we know that around over 100,000 people are living in institutions. If we include long-term care facilities, it's around 190,000. Those are numbers pulled from the Stats Canada survey on residential care facilities. But unlike an interesting or challenging part of understanding what is happening in institutions is that the Canadian Disability Survey doesn't actually go to institutionalized people. And so as a result, we don't know what's happening inside institutions. And we also don't know how specific government bills targeting ending disability poverty are going to impact institutionalized people. Because there, in institutions, you actually receive a different type, a different level of legislated poverty, which is in Ontario about $149 a month. And across Canada, it peaks at $300. So imagine living on $300 a day, or $300 a month. Wish $300 a day. And so, we don't have a lot of numbers, and I think that that's one of the most concerning aspects of this is that we don't know the size of the population afflicted by institutionalization, and we also don't know the size of the population, particularly people labeled with mental disorders that will be expanded under the changes to Track 2. And so I think...
sorry to interrupt. I only have a minute and a half left, and I just want to add one more question for you to consider as well. We know from the pandemic, like the conditions in long-term care homes became very widely publicized, and it certainly sparked a talk about instituting national standards in long-term care homes. I just wonder if you could also add to your answer about like what the conditions are like, and certainly, I know some institutions must be very well staffed, have incredible support services. There must be a whole continuum. If you can just add a little bit to that in your answer as well, please.
Yeah, so while we learned a little bit about what was happening in long-term care facilities through reporting through COVID-19, the other types of institutions for disabled people, particularly unregulated congregate settings like domiciliary hostels, homes for special care, and other residential care facilities, were not exposed to the same levels. But what we do know is that in many unregulated institutions where tens of thousands of disabled people live in Ontario alone, that the conditions include cockroaches, 4 to a room. During COVID, they were told to sleep head to foot to prevent the spread of infection. In those institutions, it's about 100% that there's going to be pests, cockroaches, bed bugs, that there will be rotten food and levels of staffing that are 1 per person who's paid about minimum wage. And so the conditions inside these institutions are really horrifying, and we continue to see fires and deaths en masse because of COVID and other infections.
Thank you, Ms. Linton.
Thank you.
We will go into our next round of questions, and I'll turn this over to my co-chair, Mr. Garneau, for the questions from senators.
Thank you, Senator Martin. And we will begin with Senator Meji. Sénatrice, vous avez 3 minutes.
You have 3 minutes, Senator. Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. My question is directed at Dr. Frazee. What would you say to other disabled persons who have stated before our committee that we shouldn't consider them vulnerable and incapable of making their own decisions in a paternalistic fashion? What would you say to them? Because you are in contact with the entire network of disabled persons that you meet with often. Some are perhaps in agreement with you, but what would you say to those who say, please leave it up to me to decide for myself? That's my first question, and I just have 2.5 minutes left. That's for, and second question for Ms. Grant or Ms. Linton. If the program had a guaranteed income for disabled persons, if they instituted that, would that lessen the likelihood that they would request MAID, in your opinion? The floor is yours.
Okay, if I may speak to your first question. Very briefly, to a disabled person who says to me that I am not vulnerable and I am entitled to make my own decisions, I say, I agree 100%. And that is why I am working very hard to make it clear that our entitlements extend to the full protection of the criminal code. And if we could take more than 60 seconds to have a conversation, let's talk. That would be my answer.
Thank you. There's about a minute left. If Dr. Grant, you'd like to answer the second question?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a number of levels to that. I think the harms that Dr. Frazee has outlined and Ms. Linton have shown us that, no, I don't think a guaranteed minimum income would mean that it was okay to kill disabled people who were not at the end of their lives. I think the inequalities and the harms of Track 2 MAID that Dr. Frazee has outlined are ongoing, and they are not only the people who are choosing MAID, they are all the people who feel their lives have been devalued by this committee and by the legislation passed by this government. So I do not think it, sorry, go ahead.
Thank you. And Ms. Linton, very quickly.
I do not think a guaranteed income program would lessen the likelihood to request MAID. I think that it could improve many people's lives, but I don't think it would result in the changes to the care system that would allow for people to live in community or live the way that they want. So, no.
Thank you. We'll now go to Senator Kutcher.
Thank you very much, Chair. Questions to Dr. Linton and Dr. Grant. And there are two questions, so I'd like to try to get to both of them. None of us wants persons with disability to seek MAID because of a lack of resources. We all support living with dignity. But I'd like you to consider a different scenario. Should a competent person with a disability who is socioeconomically secure, has no need for additional services, be allowed to request and receive MAID?
Dr. Grant, first.
I would say no, if they are not at the end of life. A competent non-disabled person does not have a right to receive MAID. I don't see why a competent disabled person would have a right to receive MAID.
Thank you. Ms. Linton?
I don't think that someone being competent or having socioeconomic supports means that they should kill themselves or let the state kill them. I don't think that's...
So what about a disabled person, same situation, who has severe and chronic unremitting pain, intolerably suffering for decades? Should that person be denied access to MAID because they have a disability?
We deny that person access to effective pain management. We've seen with the opioid crisis that pain patients are the people who've been hurt a great deal by denial of effective pain medication. So if we're really worried about their unremitting pain, we should be doing more to treat that pain rather than offering them death when we won't offer them medication to treat the pain. And there are people accessing MAID for that reason, because they have been cut off pain medications. Mm-hmm. That is Track 2 MAID.
I'm a person who lives with chronic, unrelenting pain, and I live a really wonderful, fantastic life, made more difficult by the lack of access to pain management. But no, I don't think that I should die because I have pain. I think I live a really great life, And I think that disabled people have the opportunity and should have the opportunity to live wonderful, beautiful lives with pain or without. I don't know about many people, but
Just so I understand, the presence of severe, unremitting, intolerable pain to someone, not you, but to another person, should not ever be a consideration for MAID.
if they're not at the end of their life, no, it seems like this is an issue of pain management and access to pain medication.
Thank you, Senator Kutcher. Nous irons maintenant au sénateur.
Senator Dalphond, the floor is yours.
First time I hear some of them, their positions are very clear, and I understand their desire to prevent any deteriorations in the situations of the disabled people, and to the fact that we need more support and we need to provide more resources to help disabled people. It's certainly a pressing issue. I certainly, however, doubt that we have to oppose that to the right to choose for somebody who wants to choose, like Mrs. Gladue, who was socially, economically, in good situations, but decided she wanted to, at one point, to die in the terms, on her own terms and condition, and ask for MAID. She died of natural cause in the year that followed, but I understand you will deny her the right to apply to have MAID. So your position is very clear, and I thank you for that. My question is for Dr. Linton. You said disabled people are dying en masse because of track 2. So would you have any data to support that affirmation? Because you're a researcher, so I'm sure you're speaking about the finding of your research, because we have track 2 in place for the last almost 2 years, and you say that a lot of people got access to MAID en masse. So would you have provide numbers about that?
Yeah, so I mean, we don't have access to the numbers because the MAID committee didn't look specifically at the use of institutionalization. That's despite my recommendations in data collection stages that they count those numbers. But we are seeing that Canada is the #1 global provider of MAID. And you can just turn to the front page of many newspapers or even the back page of the obituary section. It's quite clear that disabled people are dying significantly through MAID, and there are many, many, many stories. And then there's also the report on MAID that came out and the statistics that are included there. But no, we don't have clear numbers of the number of people in institutions because, as I was saying earlier,
To say that you don't have number except stories in the papers of some peoples and some we've met with previously where there's more nuance than what we can read in the papers.
I would say that the report that was provided statutorily is a really great place to look for numbers. And I also think that the stories that we hear from people and that are reported in papers are important to read because, as I was saying in my presentation, deaths...
I don't understand. I assume you also surveyed the results of Belgium, Netherlands,
Yes.
and you saw there that there is en masse disabled people asking for MAID?
Yes.
That's your affirmation?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Merci, Senator Dalphond. We'll go to Senator Wallen for 3 minutes.
Mr. Chair.
Senator Wallen, are you with us?
Senator Wallen had some technical issues, so she is not present at this time.
Thank you, Senator Martin. Therefore, over to you for 3 minutes.
Professor Grant, are there any possible safeguards we could implement under Track 2 that would make it so that it doesn't discriminate against persons with disabilities?
Thank you. No, I don't think there are. I think the only safeguard is to make sure that people are at the end of their lives when they are accessing MAID. Death can't become a solution for for the suffering of people with disabilities.
And you had characterized the fast approaching implementation of MAID for mental illness as an impending catastrophe. Could you further elaborate on your thoughts on MAID for Seoul mental illness and perhaps offer your thoughts on the expert panel's report?
I had a lot of concerns with the expert panel report, as I'm sure it doesn't surprise you. I think that the evidence that we don't know whether mental illness is irremediable and we cannot identify that was ignored. I think the data that the fact that in Belgium and the Netherlands, 70%, up to 70% of the people accessing it are women, and many of them women who've lived through trauma, is deeply troubling. And I think for me personally, who's done a lot of work in civil commitment in British Columbia, that report recommends that people who are detained by the state, forcibly treated against their will, have lost all their rights and liberties, are going to have access to MAID. And I think that's an impending human rights disaster, because the conditions in our psychiatric hospitals are abysmal, and death might feel like it's preferable to living. And the fact that someone could be hospitalized because they are suicidal and detained against their will because they are suicidal, but then given access to MAID is deeply, deeply troubling.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. Do I have more time?
You have another minute, Senator Martin.
Okay, I'll be brief then. I want to direct my last question to Dr. Frazee. How can a law such as MAID affect people who aren't directly involved in seeking or receiving MAID, in your opinion? Dr. Frazee?
I'm sorry, I was muted. I think one of the best ways that I could illustrate this is by an example from another realm of law. You know, laws and courts are among the most powerful cultural influences in our society. Last month, in the Monk Lecture by Harvard sociologist Michelle Lamont, she observed that following the adoption of same-sex marriage laws in 32 American states, there was a significant decrease of suicide attempts among LGBTQ college students. Those students weren't ready to make wedding plans. That wasn't what was going on. They were hungry for validation. And that simple but monumental legislative change was enough to give them hope. That's how law works. That's how culture works. What you are doing is going to powerfully affect whether people with disabilities in this country see ourselves as welcome and valued citizens. Thank you for your question.
Thank you. Turning it back to you now, Senator Martin.
Oh, Senator Wallen is now online, so would you kindly go to her at this time?
Very good. Good to hear. Senator Wallen, you have 3 minutes.
Going to say unmute and hope you can hear me, because as you can see, there were technical issues. And I'm sorry, because of that, I am not sure exactly who said this, but I think the message is the same. The disabled persons are dying en masse because of Track 2 MAID. It's again one of these things, as we are taking testimony here in front of a committee, it's very important that we have actual sources and references to support such a claim. That's a very, very serious one, that are dying en masse because of Track 2 MAID. I just need to clarify this issue. MAID is the law of the land. And if it is not offered to either abled or disabled persons, it would be in violation of the law. You must have the same choice. Everyone must have the same choice when it is the law of the land, but it is a choice that any individual can access. So I am not sure what is the supporting evidence for disabled persons are dying en masse because of Track 2 MAID. Is there anyone who wants to answer that?
So that would go to Miss Linton, who made that statement.
Thank you very much, Co-Chair.
Yeah, so I'm happy to provide the evidence in writing afterwards, if that is helpful. What I was intending to say with disabled people are dying en masse in institutions, they had been fighting to leave. And so what I meant in saying that was that through the last century and a half, we've had disabled people dying ongoing in a significant capacity in institutions. Institutions rapidly shorten people's lives and bring them closer to death. Through Track 2, it has expedited the death in institutions, and we see this through multiple cases. We can bring those cases forward, and I can send those over email. But yeah, it is important to recognize that disabled people are dying because of Track 2 in institutions.
I'm sorry, I just have to ask you to clarify. Because of Track 2, they're dying because of Track 2. They must qualify for MAID, otherwise you can't access MAID.
But as Catherine was saying, there's a ripple effect. So not only are people dying because they qualify, because they are disabled and they, as a result, qualify, but also because of the ripple of the changes.
Okay. I guess this is the thing when giving testimony at a Senate House of Commons committee, we have to just be very careful of the language that is used. So if you can provide evidence of that people are dying in institutional settings, that's one thing, but we cannot have on the record that disabled persons are dying en masse because of Track 2 MAID. I just don't think that's a factual statement, and it makes it difficult for us when we have to consider testimony.
Thank you. This is the end of the testimony there. We'll go back to Senator Martin to close things off.
Thank you, and thank you to all of our witnesses. And as requested, so Ms. Linton and I think earlier Dr. Frazee, if there are additional comments and support material that you can present to the committee, that would be very helpful as requested. Thank you to our witnesses once again, and we will suspend momentarily to prepare for our second panel. And if I may just make a few comments for the benefit of the new witnesses that are joining us. Before speaking, please wait until you are recognized by name. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the joint chairs. When speaking, please speak slowly and clearly. Interpretation in this video conference will work like an in-person committee meeting, and you have the choice, those online, at the bottom of your screen of either floor, English, or French. And when you're not speaking, please ensure your microphone is on mute. So with that, this is our final panel in our study before we go into our work plan and drafting of the report. So thank you to the witnesses, the Schultzens that are here in person, and also online, our witnesses that are joining us. Your testimony will be very important to our study as we conclude, so thank you for being here. So we have, as individuals, Mr. Kevin Liu by video conference, and in person, Jennifer and Mike Schutten. So we will begin with opening remarks by Mr. Kevin Liu, followed by Mr. and Mrs. Schutten. Am I pronouncing that correctly? Schutten. Schutten. Okay, it says something else on my page, but okay. So Mr. Liu, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Good morning. It's an honor to have this opportunity to appear as a witness for this committee. I'm speaking to you as a young person who has conducted a study with other young people aged 16 to 24 about their views on MAID in general and also MAID for minors. Specifically, we conducted 5 focus groups, each consisting of 3 to 5 participants. I began working on this project when I was 18 years old in my last year of high school, and I conducted this research with the Voice Childhood Ethics Research Program at McGill University. We recently completed the project, and an article is currently under review for publication. At the moment, I'm currently 23 years old, and I'm a youth advisor as part of the Youth Advisory Council for the Voice Childhood Ethics Program. The Voice Youth Advisory Council also contributed a statement in a report on this topic that was commissioned by the Quebec Health Ministry End of Life Commission, which Franco Carnevale submitted to this committee as part of his testimony in a previous meeting. I was given 48 hours to prepare for this testimony, and I'm also a full-time student in dental school, so I tried to prepare as best I could with the time that was available. My comments this morning are drawn from the results of the project regarding youth perspectives on MAID and MAID for mature minors. Please note that neither I nor the participants in the study are living with life-limiting illnesses and are from an otherwise general population. Some pertinent results of the study include the following.
Mr. Liu, sorry to interrupt. Would you kindly slow down because the
Oh yeah, of course.
Yes, our interpreters are, and also there's no sound. Okay, it's not, if you can just slow down just a little bit, but also we have a slight technical issue, so if you wouldn't mind, and you could perhaps go back and begin your sentence from where I sort of interrupted you. Thank
Okay,
you.
for sure, for sure.
It's okay? All right, so please continue. Thank
Madame
you.
la coprésidente, si je peux me permettre.
Madam Co-Chair, if I may, it was fast, but I was hearing the interpretation just fine, so we didn't miss anything per se.
I see. Oh, it was loud and okay. So, Mr. Liu, if you can just slow it down slightly, but otherwise we have been able to hear you. So sorry about the interruption. Go ahead.
Oh, no worries, no worries. So my comments this morning are drawn from the results of the project regarding youth perspectives on MAID and MAID for mature minors. Please note that neither I nor the participants in the study are living with life-limiting illnesses and are from an otherwise general population. Some pertinent results of the study include the following. Young people are capable of understanding, articulating, and empathizing with elements of MAID. They are capable and keen to reflect on high-stakes matters and to contribute toward difficult decisions that may affect them. Participants in our study expressed aspirations and concerns about how MAID should be implemented. They demonstrated a capacity and a willingness to explore, navigate, imagine, and understand multiple dimensions of MAID. They demonstrated a marked sense of responsibility for others, expressing concerns for the bereaved and considerations for the interactions and the relationships between different stakeholders at the end of life. They articulated clear understandings of what they felt might be at stake. They understood and expressed how each MAID case is nuanced, recognizing that all individuals are unique with different values and motivations for MAID. They explored their understandings of what they felt maturity meant in the context of MAID for mature minors, and how maturity may or may not be relevant in extending MAID legislation to minors. Further, they demonstrated an interest and desire to articulate their perspectives and seemed frustrated with their lack of opportunities to do so. They were aware that adults can exclude young people because they underestimate their abilities to contribute toward high-stakes decisions, such as MAID and end-of-life issues generally, and they spoke against this exclusion. In conclusion, young people want to be meaningfully engaged with difficult conversations about MAID, and they're capable of doing so. I imagine that this is also the case for young people with life-limiting conditions who may be eligible for MAID if it's extended to include mature minors. The participants in our study genuinely appreciated the opportunity to speak on a matter they felt was important and in which they felt they had a stake, yet never had an opportunity to discuss. So I'm extremely grateful that I was invited to testify as a witness today. I hope that there are more opportunities for other young people to provide their perspectives on this matter, particularly those who are minors, those with life-limiting illnesses, those who could be eligible for MAID, and other vulnerabilized young people. Finding out what's important to these young people regarding MAID and end of life can help inform and ensure that future policy is aligned with the interests of the people whom it's meant to serve. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And you're representing your generation very effectively today, very articulate. We will now go to Mr. and Mrs. Schutten, and I believe you will share your time. So you will have the floor for 5 minutes. Thank you very much for being here. And I also, we have 2 photographs that you have circulated to members of our committee, which includes the photos of your son, your late son. Okay, so Mr. and Mrs. Schutten, the floor is yours.
We thank you very much for inviting us here to share our lived experience of walking alongside a child with a terminal illness. And it's our hope that through our testimony today, you'll receive some insight into how to deliberate and what to recommend to Parliament. My wife will begin, and then I will conclude.
This is our dear son, Marcus. On February 26, 2021, he was diagnosed with Ewing sarcoma, an aggressive form of bone cancer. After 20 rounds of chemotherapy, 25 rounds of radiation, numerous surgeries, including the replacement of his entire upper right arm with an internal prosthetic, we made the decision with Marcus and his doctors to end treatment for cure and focus on quality of life. Marcus's care was then transferred from BC Children's Hospital to Canuck Place Children's Hospice. The palliative and hospice care Marcus received at our home was focused on addressing his suffering and valuing his dignity. The doctors and nurses knew his days would be short, and their efforts ensured that the days he had left were lived well. Marcus wanted to die at home, surrounded by his family, but he also didn't want to experience the intense pain and suffering that he knew would come as his lungs filled with tumors. On what turned out to be his last Friday, Nurse Shanna assessed Marcus and said, "His time is short." She advised us to take the window we still had for Marcus to be transported to Canuck Place Hospice in Vancouver. With the increased intensity of his care, we agreed. Our whole family was together at the hospice, and as we entered the evening, it appeared that Marcus would only last a few more hours. As each of his siblings said goodnight to Marcus, he told them he loved them and said, "See you in paradise." Mike and I didn't sleep at all, but took turns sitting beside Marcus. The nurses maintained his medication, and Marcus assured us that he was very comfortable and not in any pain. At one point, he said to me, "This is how I hoped it would be." As dawn arrived, we realized that God had another day in store for Marcus. Early that morning, Marcus's friends arrived at the hospice, and together they cried, laughed, and prayed. That afternoon, both Marcus's sets of grandparents also came to say goodbye. By early Sunday morning, Marcus was non-responsive, and his breathing had become a lot more shallow. Just before 2:30 that afternoon, Marcus's breathing slowed, and with each of us around his bedside, he took his final, peaceful breaths.
Marcus died just 6 short months ago on May 29th, 2022. only 15 months after his diagnosis. If he was here today, his appeal to you would be to not expand euthanasia to minors for two reasons. Earlier this month, it was reported in the news that CAMAP, the Canadian Association of Maid Assessors and Providers, is recommending that physicians have an obligation to bring up medical assistance in dying with patients who meet eligibility requirements. As Jennifer just outlined, Marcus met all the eligibility requirements. This means that if euthanasia is extended to minors, the day will come when families just like ours, with their dying children, will feel an obligation to end the suffering of their child by having a doctor euthanize him or her. Dear committee members, we recommend against the expansion of euthanasia because by giving some minors the right to request, you put all minors and their families in a position where they are obliged to consider. If that happened to Marcus, the message he would have heard would have been clear. We don't value your life. We don't think it is worth living. And if you want, we can end it for you. It would have said to him, we are giving up on you. Honorable members, we should never give up on our children. The second reason we recommend you don't extend MAID to minors is because by doing so, you eliminate unimaginably beautiful experiences. When we went to the Canuck Place Children's Hospice, we didn't know how long Marcus would live. We hadn't even wanted to go to the hospice initially, but being there allowed us to embrace each moment we had with him and him with us. If euthanasia becomes available to minors, then that Friday night when we thought Marcus was going to go, after we'd all had our time with him to say our goodbyes, it would have seemed like the thing to do, right? It's time, the nurse would say. It's the compassionate thing to do. He doesn't have to suffer anymore. But then we would not have had Saturday, a most beautiful day, shared with our son, our brother, and our friend. We suffered much with Marcus, and we miss him terribly. But Marcus showed us, he showed us how to find meaning in suffering. And he was thankful for each day that God gave to him. And therefore, it is our heartfelt recommendation to this committee on behalf of Marcus and our family that you do not extend MAID to minors, and instead focus on providing the necessary, robust, palliative, and hospice care resources to ensure the best quality of living, even when someone is dying. Thank you.
Thank you very much to the Schultons for your courageous testimony this morning. I cannot imagine being in your shoes, but the fact that you were able to share this testimony with us was very powerful. So we'll go into our first round of questions. We'll begin with Mr. Cooper. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. Thank you to the witnesses, and in particular, thank you to Mr. and Mrs. Schutten for your powerful and heartfelt testimony, and I wish to express my condolences for your loss of your son. And I want to maybe start with a general question. It sounds like your son, Marcus, had no desire to die. He wanted to live. But we also heard testimony from a mother whose son was 16. MAID was not available to him, and she gave powerful testimony before the committee that if he had the option of MAID, it would have resulted in him ending his suffering just a little sooner before he passed on. So what would you say in a situation like that, and what would you say in response to that mother's very powerful testimony before this committee?
Mm-hmm. Thank you for the question. I think that we need to remember that perspective is everything. And we also need to acknowledge the influence and ability of parents, of government, of healthcare providers to influence children in our country. So if the perspective through suffering is that this suffering is going to get worse, there's unimaginable things that might or could happen to you, your life might be very short, then that leads to despair. And as Viktor Frankl once said, he said, despair is suffering without meaning. And if that's the perspective that we're portraying to children who are suffering from terminal illness, then I can agree with you that might lead to despair, which could include a request for medical assistance in dying. But if the perspective is, as our experience, right from the very day that Marcus's oncologist said to him, there's nothing more we can do. When Marcus asked him, how long do I have? The doctor said, we don't know, and we're not going to focus on that. We're going to focus on living every day you have well, and we're going to do everything we can to ensure you can live every day you have well. That perspective does not lead to despair, and that perspective does not lead to someone's request to ask a doctor to euthanize him or her.
Thank you for that. Now, Mr. Schouten, you mentioned in your testimony that the Canadian Association of MAID Assessors has come up with a recommendation that medical doctors have an obligation to mention or bring up MAID when their patients meet the eligibility requirements. Can you speak to what impact you think that may have in terms of end-of-life care, and in particular to mature minors, should MAID be expanded to mature minors?
Mm-hmm. I think as we've seen in other demographics in our country, that obligation to consider is happening more and more. While we were at Canuck Place Hospice on more than one occasion, we expressed gratitude that euthanasia for children was not legal in Canada, and that was not part of the suite of options that the doctors and healthcare providers had in order to treat our son. All of his treatment, all of his care was focused on him living well. And in the end, it wasn't day by day. It was hour by hour, moment by moment. And when those resources are there, the request for someone to die and ask a doctor to end that suffering by euthanizing them, it doesn't happen.
Right. Well, thank you for that. And can you speak to Marcus's experience in the end-of-life care that he received and how that measures up against palliative care and long-term care that most adults receive?
Mm-hmm. About 6 months before Marcus was diagnosed, I had an uncle who was 69. I was diagnosed with stomach cancer. He did not have his first appointment with an oncologist until after he had passed away. Our doctors, through the child system, were always ahead of us, whereas my uncle's wife had to run around all over the place trying to find treatment for him, trying to find the right medication, trying to address every symptom that came up. In our case, through BC Children's Hospital and the Canuck Place Children's Hospice, they were always ahead of us, so much so that as my wife said, that Friday morning, they knew that this was the time. They knew Marcus wanted to stay home, but they said, if you have a window to get to Canuck Place Children's Hospice, this is now. So that made us able, as a family, to spend every living moment we had yet with Marcus living well, enjoying each moment we had with him, sharing laughs, sharing memories, him telling us over and over that he loved us. When he was in the hospice and said to, as Jennifer indicated in her testimony, this is how I hoped it would be, that's how he hoped it would be. Surrounded by his family, surrounded by healthcare professionals who didn't give up on him, who didn't say, your life is not worth living, you might want to request us to end it. They considered his life worth living right up to the moment that he passed away at the hospice.
Okay, thank you very much. Sorry, I was writing something down. Apologies. Next, we're going to go to Monsieur Arsenault. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Merci, Madame la.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. I'd like to start by greeting our witnesses warmly today and thank the Schouten family for their courageous testimony. It's the worst thing that could happen to parents, and my parents lost their daughter, my sister, and I saw how that devastated my parents, so I find you to be extremely courageous, and I know that even with time it's difficult to get through this, but there is always light at the end of the tunnel. That's what I would say to you. I would start by asking Mr. Liu an initial question. Mr. Liu, you said that youth want to have their input. Now, how would you sum up the position of the youth that you have consulted about MAID? Just in a couple of sentences, are they in favour of MAID for mature minors or not?
Hi, thank you for your question. I guess it's a bit of a difficult question to answer because I think, like adults, young people also have a wide variety of perspectives and opinions and preferences for the topic. So to say, I think blankly, like, yes, youth are in favor, youth are not in favor is a difficult question to answer. I think that importantly, sort of the lack of a consensus doesn't mean that it's wishy-washy per se, just that there's nuance, and that's more reason to really elicit more youth perspectives to understand more about what their preferences, what their visions are, so that we're able to advance policy in a way that is aligned with what's important to them. Though generally in our focus groups, what we saw was by the end of them, more participants were in favor or sensitive to the benefits of medical assistance in dying and felt more comfortable with young people, their ability to make difficult decisions like this.
I see. I'm sorry to cut you off because I don't have much time and I do want to speak to the Schutten family. Thank you, Mr. Liu. I'll come back to you if I have enough time left over at the end. Mr. or Mrs. Schutten, could you remind me the age of your son when he passed, please?
Yes. When Marcus was diagnosed with Ewing sarcoma, he was 17 years old. And when we buried him in the ground, he was 18 years old.
Okay, merci.
Thank you. Well, that is a segue to my question. If we interpret the Carter decision, which brought us to the era of MAID in Canada, a person needs to be a major under the Criminal Code, 18. Now, some witnesses have said that in other countries, not a lot of countries, but where there are countries where MAID is offered for some age groups where kids are very sick and they become mature because of their illness or disease and being in and out of hospitals throughout their lives. Some of them have expressed the need for MAID, but saying that parents should be consulted, but at the end of the day, it was the child's decision that would take precedence, that would trump anyone else's decision, and that they would be entitled to request MAID from healthcare teams. Now, what I'm going to ask you, in light of the cruel experience that you had, your son was 17, 18, but were made to be offered in Canada one day to minors, and things are still not clear in my head. What age would be the cutoff in your opinion, and what guardrails or safeguards would have to be in place in the case of mature minors, please?
So would you mind being brief in your response? There's less than a minute remaining.
Sure. I will just speak to the experience that we had, because that's our lived experience. Friday evening, Marcus thought that he was going to go. And he called us all to his bedside and told us that he loved us. And Saturday morning, when he was still with us, and I said to him, Marcus, should I see if your buddies are able to come to the hospice? These friends that you see on the picture right in front of you. His eyes lit up. And he said, if you could, that would be so good. And he had 90 minutes of time with them, where he wouldn't have had that time if the decision for medical assistance in dying had happened. And he had that time because everyone around him, from his parents to his healthcare providers, valued his dignity, valued his life, and did everything they could to ensure that he lived well, even though he was dying, even though over the course of 2 months, he drowned to death as his lungs filled with tumors. There's not much more terrible way you can go. But we can in our country, and our experience is proof of that. We can care for each other and give each other that dignity so that the request for MAID doesn't have to be there.
Next, we'll go to...
Merci aux témoins.
Thank you very much to the witnesses.
Thank you. And Monsieur Thériault, you have 5 minutes at this time.
Oui, d'abord.
Well, thank you, Mr. and Mrs. Schutten. My sincere condolences. Your testimony really touched me. And I understand that you're still in the grieving process, probably, and I hope that in some way today's experience can help to alleviate your suffering and help you through this process of grieving in some small way. Now, there is a woman who testified just like you are today. My colleague, Mr. Cooper, alluded to her, Ms. Marco, who was the mother of Charles. Now, Charles was 17 years, 9 months, and had a bone cancer too. It was a very pervasive bone cancer. And over the course of 2 years, well, he died 2 years after the diagnosis. On that exact day, 2 years later, he died by sedation as part of his palliative care. He fought, he was brave, he was courageous, he fought at every stage, but he never had any respite, no remission, and he lost out to the disease. And for him, what his mother told us, because she undertook to testify before us, and she said that free choice was important to him, and that for him, medical assistance in dying was his way of winning over the disease, and that it didn't determine it. At least he had an opportunity to decide in serenity, surrounded by his loved ones, when he would go, that he would choose this moment. And when I look at the photo, well, I look at the photo on the table that you've put there, and I feel that your testimony could have been completely different. Now, this kind of experience is also occurring in the context of palliative care, where children are requesting, or mature minors are requesting MAID. Now, Mr. Liu made his presentation today. Youth are like adults to the extent that some are in favour of MAID, some are against MAID. But what of the role of the state? Is it not precisely to ensure that one has the option, the opportunity to exercise one's free choice in the context of the most intimate decision, their own death, and how they wish to live out that death?
As I said earlier, perspective is everything. 2 weeks before Marcus passed away, someone had gifted us with funds to use an Airbnb on Vancouver Island. We almost didn't make it because on the way, we had to stop at BC Children's Hospital to empty Marcus's lungs with 2 liters of liquid. That's how sick he was. But because that precious time had been given to us, he wanted to use it. He recognized, as I said in my testimony, that when you unnaturally interrupt life through medical assistance in dying, you miss out on beautiful experiences that you can have. It's one thing to ask healthy, able-bodied minors in our country, if you received this diagnosis and life looked this terrible, would you want medical assistance in dying? And they say, yeah, I think so. It's an entirely other thing to actually experience it yourself or with your child and have available the palliative and hospice resources to care for said illness.
Now, Mr. Liu just said the opposite to us. These are young people who are healthy. Now, if your Marcus had said to you, that is what I want, well, what Ms. Marcos said to us, had Charles wanted this, she would have been there for him had he wished to endure through his suffering. And she would also have supported his decision to interrupt his life at a specific moment. Now, had your Marcus said, I want to put an end to this with the help of MAID, would you have supported him? Would you have agreed with his decision? Because that's something we need to take into account, the role of the parents.
Again, just to reiterate, that Friday night, Marcus, he wanted to die. He was ready to die. He was ready to go and meet Jesus. He's a Christian. And he didn't. And then that Saturday, he had beautiful experiences with his best friends and with his family and with his grandparents. Marcus wanted to die. He was ready to die. But if by asking a doctor Friday night to end his life, he would have missed out on those beautiful opportunities.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Schutten. And lastly, we'll have Mr. McGregor, who has the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Co-Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses. And I would like to start with the Schuttens. First of all, in echoing my colleagues, I'd like to thank you both for having the courage to appear before our committee and to share your personal experiences with your son, Marcus. What we're struggling with here is respecting a person's autonomy. And I guess the question I want to pose to you is under BC law, because I'm also a resident of British Columbia, we have a provincial law, the Infants Act, which defines what mature minor consent is. So essentially children under provincial law, they can refuse health care if the healthcare provider assesses them and determines that they have the necessary understanding to give that consent. So, for example, if there was a child living with a terminal illness and the healthcare provider had the understanding that they could give consent, that child could say, well, I don't want you to resuscitate me. I want to refuse feeding. I want to refuse all kinds of life-saving measures should my body fail. So perhaps I could ask you for your perspective on that, because that is a way for a child under the age of 18, essentially giving their consent that if my body is, I don't want to be resuscitated. Can you maybe frame your answer, because that's a child making a decision on their end-of-life care, and how in your mind does that differentiate from a child using that same autonomy to say, I want to choose the time and space of my passing, and maybe I want to do it so that I can have my family members and friends come at a predetermined time, and I can then go out the way I want to.
I think two things come to mind as you ask your question. One is that our experience is that all throughout Marcus's treatment, he was very involved. Right from the first bad scan, where it showed that before the cancer had even been gone, it was back into his lungs. And Marcus was consulted. It was his decision to continue to proceed with treatment. It was his decision that day that my wife referenced when our oncologist said there's nothing more we can do. It was his decision, along with us, to say, I want treatment so that my quality of life is as good as it can be in the days that I have left. The other thought, as you ask your question, is that to emphasize the point that when you make it available to minors, then people like Marcus, families like ours, will be in a position where they're obliged to consider this. That doesn't sound like autonomy to me.
Okay, thank you for that answer and perspective. I respect that. Mr. Liu, I'd like to turn to you. I do appreciate the testimony you gave, because we did have another witness who did say there is a lack of consultation among minors in this country, and I appreciate the first steps you've taken. So I guess, our committee is tasked with tabling a report in February of next year. We do want this to be reflective of the witness testimony, but we also want to have some solid recommendations. So from your perspective, what would you like to see the federal government do to build on what you've already done? Like if you could just take the remaining time that I have, a minute, to see what kind of recommendations you would like to see in our report for the federal government to build on what you've already started here.
Yeah, of course. It's a big question. Is it okay if I take a few moments to consider? I won't be too long. I know time is limited.
Okay, there's about 1 minute remaining, so go ahead.
Okay. I think that it would definitely be important to consult vulnerabilized young people who wouldn't normally be in an otherwise general population. People who could have different perspectives and people who could be affected by this. So Indigenous young people, again, minors, people who have terminal illnesses and might be eligible for medical assistance in dying. I think that there's tremendous value in that. I think a good place to start would be youth advisory councils, and also proactively seeking youth input. I think it's very hard to find a young person who will approach you and be like, yes, we're young people. We want to talk about medical assistance in dying. So I think being proactive and actively approaching young people, and that's definitely the way to go.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And now I will turn this over to my co-chair for the next round of questions.
Thank you, Senator Martin. We'll begin with Sénatrice Meiji with 3 minutes.
Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. My first questions are directed at Mr. Liu. Now, given that some witnesses have said that it would be interesting to hear the point of view of youth, I'm very glad that you're appearing before us today. But I'd like a bit of clarity around the study you conducted. Can you please send the study into the committee if it's not already with us already? Secondly, what is the demographic distribution of the youth you've consulted? Most of them from Montreal, urban centres, rural areas, and in total, how many young people participated in your study?
Yeah, of course. Thank you for your question. So I'm not sure if I'm allowed to submit the study because it's currently under review from a journal. But I can double check with my supervisors and my research supervisors, and if I'm allowed to, then I would be very happy to share the manuscript. And in terms of demographic information, there were 5 focus groups that we conducted, ages ranging from 16 to 24, and the study was conducted in Montreal. Would you like specific demographics of each of the 5 focus groups?
Quand vous allez nous l'envoyer.
Well, when and if you do send it in, I imagine that will be evident in the study, but thank you very much. And I do have another question, one for Mr. and Mrs. Schouten. Yes, good morning. It's the worst kind of thing that could happen to anyone that's happened to you in your lives. Now, in a past life, I worked in the field of palliative care as a family doctor, and families, when they were supporting their loved ones, regardless of their age, they said that 24 to 48 hours before the individual dies was the most incredible period of their lives. And, I just do have a question, though. Since MAID is being considered an option for mature minors, would they be forced to agree to it? Everyone says, oh, well, we're proposing death to them, but should they in any way be forced to agree? And as parents, since it's on the table, would you ever feel that you should encourage your son to choose MAID?
So I think that you mentioned palliative care and how important that is. And when the palliative care is focused on...
I'm sorry. I know that I did refer to palliative care, but I just wanted to communicate that I understood what you experienced. But what I'm trying to get at is if MAID is offered to our youth, would they be forced to agree to it? Or in your opinion, as parents, would you feel guilty in some way for feeling that you might tell your son, oh, well, to alleviate suffering, would you like to consider MAID? If this were on the table for mature minors, how would you feel?
If we would have suggested to our son to consider medical assistance in dying, or if his healthcare providers would have said to him, would you like to consider medical assistance in dying? The message he would have heard is, you're giving up on me. And that would lead to despair, and that would further entrench the desire to have medical assistance in dying. We are incredibly grateful and thankful that our healthcare providers, as well as us as parents, were given the strength to ensure Marcus that every day it was going to be a day worth living, no matter how much suffering came.
Thank you. We'll now go to Senator Kutcher.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here. My first question is to Mr. Liu, and then I would ask the Shootens a question as well. So, Mr. Liu, if you could be relatively brief because of the time we have. In your focus groups, do young people, is there a message to us that young people want us to respect their wishes about end-of-life decisions?
Yes, I think there's a resounding yes in that. They categorically agreed that young people are the best experts of their own experiences, and that those experiences inform their end-of-life decisions. And yeah.
Thank you very much for that. And for the Shootens, as a parent myself and a grandparent and a physician who has sat with many people who have lost their children, I know that it's the most difficult thing, and I'm so sorry for your loss. Our challenge is to try to understand this in a much more complex way, and you help us think about important issues. And this is going to be a difficult question, but I want you to grapple with it, please. Your son chose to die in a specific way, and we respect that. We respect his choice of how to do it, surrounded by his family and the support that you gave him. But we also know that not all of those in similar circumstances would necessarily make the same choice. And we also know that not all families in the same circumstances would also make the same choice. So do you respect that others in similar circumstances may choose a different path for their end of life? Maybe different than your son and different than your perspectives. Maybe they have different values, different ways of understanding the world. Would you respect that if their choice and their family's choice was made, or should they be denied access to MAID?
It wasn't Marcus's choice to die, just to clarify. Marcus wanted to live. He didn't want to die. He was given a terminal illness outside of our control that we were responsible with. How do we respond to this? How do we live with this now? And we've shared with you this morning on how we did that. I can acknowledge that there are other families where, as I indicated earlier, if you focus on the suffering and on despair and on how terrible life is going to get, that can and will lead to a request to die. There were times in Marcus's illness when he wanted to die. The pain was a lot. He wanted to die. But immediately, the healthcare providers found ways to address that pain, not by suggesting to him, you're right, we're going to give up on you, here's the option now. If that would have happened, he very likely would have died way sooner than he did.
I hear what you're saying, but people may have a different perspective than yours. And if they have a different perspective, and if they may not agree with your statement, would you respect their ability to make that decision?
I respect that people have a different viewpoint on this and approach it with a different worldview, but our appeal to you is that if you open up euthanasia for minors, then even families like ours who would not support that decision will feel obliged to consider it. That's what's problematic here. And as CAMAP it's been recently revealed, is happening already in our country. And for that to happen to families sitting in places like the Canuck Place Children's Hospice would be incredibly, incredibly a negative experience for them.
Thank you. Nous irons maintenant au sénateur.
Senator Dalphond.
Merci, Monsieur le Co-Président.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair.
Well, I address my questions to Mike and Jennifer Schutten, which I thank very much for being present with us today and offer my deepest condolences. If I understand well from the letter you sent to us in April and from the other letters you've published on various media, that be about abortions or MAID, you are of the view that, as Christian political activist, that a life is always worth living. That's your main philosophy. And I respect your views, and this is a matter of, it's entrenched in your political stance that you took. But when I read your letter, and that's April, and you said in that letter that the rapid pace of expansions has recently become very poignant for our family about the cancer of your son, in particular for our 18-year-old son. So when you wrote to us, your son was already 18 years old. I think he was born in March or April? July. So he was like close to being 18. He was already 18 and 7 months. So he was eligible to MAID for about 7 months before he decided to stop the treatment. And despite that he was admissible to MAID, he never asked for it. And it was never part of your discussions. So why are you so fearful if we extend MAID to mature minors that it's going to be changing your situation? Because your son and your family, because of your beliefs and your values, it was not an option you will consider, but you were mindful that it was available. He was over 18. He could have received it if he had applied for it, because he was obviously in a kind of, once he has stopped treatment, he was, unfortunately, that natural death was imminent, a matter of months or weeks. And so it did not prevent you from doing so. But as my colleague said, some other families believe differently. And we heard another mother that said her son, who was 17 and a half, was going through unbearable suffering, and he wanted to have access to MAID. So while we would deny access to MAID to that 17 and a half, because it will force you to apply for MAID, which you did not apply, and your son did not apply for it. So why should we deprive others of the choice?
Again, we were grateful to be invited here by you to share our experience with suffering and death of a child. When Marcus was 17 and diagnosed on February 26th, we were driving back to our home from the Vancouver BC Children's Hospital in Vancouver, and he said to us, he said, "Mom and Dad, this cancer sounds really bad. If they don't get it the first time, I might as well just go home to die, because there's no chance." He understood from day one that this was terminal. And yet, all of his treatment was focused, first of all, on cure, yes, and then when it morphed into treatment for quality of life, it all emphasized the value of his life, no matter how sick he got, no matter how incapacitated he became. That is our experience, and we're grateful to share that. I would suggest if you would like to hear from people who have different experiences, you need to talk to them.
You did. That's
Thank
why
you.
we are, your position is to deny access to these people. So that's what I understand. Thank you.
Merci, Sénateur Dalphond. Senator Wallen for 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. And my questions are for Jennifer and Mike, and obviously about their son Marcus. You have used the word on several occasions, obliged, and I'm wondering, did any medical professional, a doctor or a nurse or a maid provider, come in and say to you, you must do this, you should do this, you have an obligation to do this? What exactly occurred in the final stages?
The word oblige, Senator, comes directly out of the CAMAP document, where they are recommending that physicians have an obligation to bring up medical assistance in dying with people.
Right, as they do the other options,
Exactly.
right.
So,
they have to lay out for patients all of the options to consider. But beyond that, did somebody come in and say, you are doing the wrong thing, we don't think your personal or religious views are acceptable, and we think that the best course of action is made and right now?
So, as you would have heard in our testimony, Marcus had all of his treatment at BC Children's Hospital,
Right.
and he was cared for. His palliative and hospice care was provided through Canuck Place Children's Hospice, so it was not part of the conversation at those institutions.
Right. No, that's what I think we're just trying to, what my colleagues and I are trying to establish here, because it's a very, very important principle that MAID is about choice. And if you choose not to access MAID, nobody will ever challenge you on that as a parents, or from the point of view of your son, of Marcus. Nobody can force you to do this, because in fact you'd have to go through an assessment process. And if you were not interested in that, or if it offended your views, nobody could force you to do that.
I think we have to be very careful here. You would recognize, as we do, that the news this week is filled with people who have been led to despair because medical assistance in dying was offered to them. When you do the same to minors, children who have not the same capacity as adults, and their families who are simply trying to live each day well, that will lead to despair.
Well, I only, obviously don't have your experience, but having gone through this with people with whom I'm extremely close, I watched them choose to have MAID as an option. I watched them change their mind about the date. In one case to push it out, in one case to bring it closer, and they had that choice. So I think that's just what we're trying to say. We're all very sad about the circumstances you were in. I just wanted to reassure people that in no way can MAID be forced on someone against their will, or someone with the religious views of your son or the personal views that you may have, that it just isn't, even if they are suffering. I think by offering palliative care or MAID or whatever the options may be, that is not saying you are not worth life, you are not worth living. That is not the message that I hear.
And I would implore you to try to be open to that message. We were sitting in the first panel this morning listening in, and just to emphasize what was said there, the impact of the law is far greater than you might think it is.
Thank you, Senator Wallin. We'll now conclude with Senator Martin for 3 minutes.
To our witnesses this morning, Mr. Liu, I just want to commend you on the work that you undertook, and the fact that you're doing some very important work to hear the voices of the mature minors. My question is sort of focusing on the importance of the specialized palliative care or palliative care. We've heard from previous witnesses about the state of palliative care in Canada and the fact that it's not the same across the country. And in your case, you had this very incredible experience of receiving hospice care and palliative care for your son. So how important that care is in addressing these end-of-life issues, or in the case of your son, to live well right to the end. So I'd love to get your perspective on the importance of palliative care, hospice care, and specialized palliative care in the time that remains for me.
When Marcus had his first negative scan, that was 6 months into his treatment. And already at that meeting with his oncology team, the Canuck Place Hospice nurses and doctors were part of that meeting. His palliative care was already engaged at that point. They knew Marcus. They knew our family. They knew how to care for him when it came time to transfer all of his care into the Canuck Place Children's Hospice from BC Children's Hospital. As I said earlier, it was incredibly comforting to know that they were always one step ahead of us. The resources that are allocated to the care for children who have terminal illness and are in a palliative condition appear to be far superior than those allocated to people in the adult world. As I shared, my uncle and his family spent the last few months of his life just scrambling around trying to find the right medication, the right treatment, what to do when, how to do it. Whereas every day when they would come to our house, the Canuck Place Hospice nurses, they would assess Marcus and say, I think we need this type of medication, or we need an extra dose of this type of medication to treat this, or let's bring in some more bedding or pillows or oxygen, whatever it had to be, they were always ahead of us. And that allowed Marcus to enjoy, as you see, even on the pictures, the very day before he passed away, to enjoy every moment he had that he was alive, and to not miss out on those unnaturally interrupted, beautiful experiences that would have happened if he would have chose medical assistance in dying far earlier.
Senator, you have about 20 seconds.
Okay, I'll just conclude. So what I'm hearing is that it's important to, the timing of the palliative care is not just attached to the end, but rather if it overlaps the care, the early care, that care can be seamless as a result of what happened in your case. And again, thank you very much. I will conclude, Mr. Chair, so I'm not in my question mode, but putting back my coach. Yes. So again, thank you very much for your testimonies as we end and conclude time with our witnesses. I think it was, again, just very eye-opening and compelling, and just want to thank each of you for taking the time to share your lived experience with us, as well as your insights among the young people whom you studied and in your report, Mr. Liu, thank you for sharing that with us as well. I'm told by the analysts, because we're going into draft instruction on Tuesday of next week, in order for you to submit your report, it would have to be very quick. So just wanted to let you know the timeline. And to my colleagues, this does conclude our study with our witnesses, and that on Tuesday we begin drafting instructions for our final report. If you recall, there's an email on November the 22nd from our analysts, so if you can review the instructions on that so that we can begin our drafting instructions on Tuesday. So with that, thank you so much to everyone, and I bring this meeting to a close.